Has he got the call?
A man's life here at the BBC, the old cold showers. You can make so many good friends there. Now, at this point, I have to tell you, the programme's all but over. News which I know will cause much anxiety in some quarters. Now, in the meantime, I should remind you, he's not over till it's over.
56.68. It's tight to do that, but he's really... And look at that free joy. Could you get closer? He's 2 steps away from the line.
Anybody hear the fat lady sing? Now, as a matter of fact, we're going to finish on a song. Some people say selling Andy Cole to Manchester United will prove to be Kevin Keegan's biggest mistake. Not while this remains for a waiting posterity. Good night.
What would you do if I sang out a tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me?
I might do, he's a bit good, isn't he?
Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key.
Ooh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Ooh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Ooh, I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends, with a little help from my friends.
Another game attempt at getting it right next week in Auntie's Sporting Bloomers at 8:30. And it's a visit to Terry's birthplace tomorrow evening at 7:30 in Wogan's Island. Sibling rivalry escalates with murderous consequences. My Son Johnny starting shortly on BBC2.
How does a Mountie spend his Friday nights? Heading for the streets. Heading for trouble. Heading for a fall.
You realize I'm going to have to confiscate that.
Fraser heads due south. Fridays at 8 on BBC1.
Like thousands of other children, John Williams grew up in a Barnardo's home, believing that he was an orphan.
There's this strong sense of being separate. I need to feel connected.
As their policy of protection is removed, family records are exposed.
Being the mother of John Williams. I didn't know she'd written all this stuff for me.
Rejection and reunion. Painful histories are revisited in the second part of Barnardo's Children, in half an hour.
On BBC1 now, the 9 o'clock news with Michael Burke.
The United Nations operation in Bosnia is on the brink of collapse tonight after the Bosnian Serbs overran one of the so-called safe havens. NATO airstrikes failed to stop them taking Srebrenica. UN peacekeepers are fleeing along with thousands of refugees. President Yeltsin's been taken to hospital with heart trouble. And after 2 days of trouble, the Orangemen have marched through Portadown in silence. Good evening. The UN spokesman in Sarajevo has described the Bosnian Serbs' capture of the so-called safe area of Srebrenica today as the turning point for United Nations peacekeeping. The Serbs brushed aside 2 NATO airstrikes and a battalion of Dutch peacekeeping troops to overrun the town. Western leaders are openly talking of withdrawing the UN forces from Bosnia. But the French President, Jacques Chirac, has said the Franco-British Rapid Reaction Force, now being deployed in Bosnia, should be used to recapture Srebrenica to restore the integrity of the UN. Srebrenica was protected by about 400 Dutch troops stationed at the 2 main entrances to the town. This morning, both positions were attacked by Serb tanks. At 20 to 3 local time, NATO responded by sending in 2 F-16 warplanes. One of the tanks was destroyed, but it was too late. Within an hour, 1,500 Serb soldiers entered the town and the Dutch peacekeepers fled. Nearly all the town's 30,000 Muslim refugees are reported to have followed them.
It didn't take long for the Bosnian Serbs to send their response to UN headquarters in Sarajevo. 2 shells exploded close to the building not long after the NATO air attack. UN troops here were among thousands taking cover in Bosnia today.
How do you understand the situation in Srebrenica?
The situation is very dire. 2 of the United Nations compounds are being attacked by Bosnian Serb forces. They are being shelled. Also, a number of our observation posts have been hit.
These men were safe enough, but there was real anxiety about their Dutch colleagues in Srebrenica. Once it had become clear that air action had failed, that Srebrenica had fallen to the Bosnian Serbs, the UN admitted that it had been found wanting.
I think it's probably one of the defining moments of peacekeeping in Bosnia, perhaps peacekeeping in general, and likely to prove to be a turning point for us all.
The issue of a UN withdrawal from Bosnia will now come up again. What is the UN position on that?
Well, I think it's a valid question for all the troop-contributing nations to re-evaluate the situation as the situation changes on the ground. They have to work out, are the costs worth the gains?
In the ruins of Sarajevo Television Center, wrecked by a Serb attack 2 weeks ago, the Bosnian Prime Minister said civilians in Srebrenica had been sentenced to death by the UN's failure.
Unbelievable that they could not do anything about this 5 days ago, 3-4 days ago, even yesterday. They had to wait today until the Serbs practically entered Srebrenica to hit one Serb tank.
Bosnian Serb television reported that Srebrenica had been liberated. It said that the Geneva Convention would be applied to all civilians and UN troops. As many as 40,000, mainly Muslim refugees, don't believe them. They're fleeing the Serb advance, just as in 1993 when Srebrenica almost fell to the Bosnian Serbs. This aid worker talked to colleagues who were among the last people to leave Srebrenica before it fell.
There was just a lot of people, very tired, very frightened, and under the fire of artillery and machine gun. It was really horrendous.
UN troops in Sarajevo left their shelters in late afternoon. There's a strong chance they'll be back in them in the days and weeks to come. This is the worst crisis the UN has faced since it came to this country. It has exposed all the uneasy compromises and contradictions that are fatally undermining what it's trying to do here. Unless the Secretary-General and the government's contributing troops can do some fast thinking to redefine the mission, withdrawal may become the only option available to them. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Bosnian Serb television is tonight claiming that another UN safe area, Žepa, is about to fall into their hands along with Srebrenica. It was a Serb offensive against Srebrenica 2 years ago that led the UN to create the so-called safe areas to protect Bosnian civilians. There are 6 areas in all: Srebrenica, Žepa and Gorazda are small enclaves in the east of Bosnia. Bihać, Tuzla and Sarajevo are larger, but have also been under siege. Our correspondent Martin Bell, who's reported from Bosnia since the start of the war, now assesses what's left of the UN's safe area policy.
Srebrenica has been this way before, in the crisis of March 2 years ago, when thousands of people fled, but many more thousands remained. Srebrenica, along with 5 other zones, was then declared a UN-protected safe area. And General Philippe Morillon, then the UN commander, assured the people of the UN's determination to protect them. That determination has faded.
The enclave Srebrenica.
The Dutch Defence Minister Joris Verhoeven, announcing the fall of the enclave, said the Dutch commander of UN troops was negotiating with the Serbs for his men and thousands of refugees to leave. He described what had happened as a disaster of major proportions. It is the first safe area to fall.
In the past, UN commanders have been reluctant to use air attacks, but it's tragic in this case, although they have shown a willingness to do so, but it has not been enough to stop the Serbs.
The remaining eastern enclaves look increasingly vulnerable. These include the largest of them, Gorazde, with its garrison of 400 British UN troops, surrounded, isolated and unable to function effectively. So what does the UN do? For the first time, it has a war-fighting force in the area. Men of the Rapid Reaction Force training in southern Herzegovina. The British arrived first, to be followed today by the French. UN white has given way to camouflage, for these are serious soldiers. The force is intended to protect the protectors, and the French president suggested today it could be used to restore the integrity of the Srebrenica zone. France, he said, was ready to use its means. Martin Bell, BBC News.
Here, the Prime Minister has praised the Royal Ulster Constabulary's restraint and professionalism in handling the confrontation in Portadown with the Orangemen. The annual march finally went ahead today, ending a two-day standoff with the police. It ended after the hundreds of Orangemen gathered outside Drumcree Church were able to march along their traditional route down to the mainly Catholic Garvaghy Road.
After 48 hours of standoff, violence and tension, finally today the Orangemen of Portadown stepped out on their traditional route, exactly as would have happened on Sunday when the confrontation began, though with one major difference: in silence. No band accompanied the marchers as they would have 2 days ago, as they entered the Catholic area where their presence was not welcome. That appeared to be part of the compromise thrashed out overnight and today. And on the other side, those Catholics who'd blocked the route for hours moved aside. Two traditions divided by centuries of bitter history on one small piece of road that has come to embody what's important to both of them, in stony silence. There's still some doubt as to whether a permanent resolution has been found here, though the Catholics felt it had and were happy.
It shows that three negotiation, right? Three talk and three listening to one another. Solutions can be reached at.
The Orangemen were piped back onto home turf. The mood of the MPs was positively triumphant. And they were insistent that they had not been the first to blink.
We're delighted to be back down the traditional route, as we expect to be again.
Yeah! Surrender! Are you happy with the compromise?
No compromise by us. We have come down our traditional route in normal form with our flags flying.
This was a victory celebration, but the marching season has weeks to go and many more roads yet to walk. One such is the Orma Road in Belfast, and a Catholic part of it where from early today the shutters had come down. Orangemen plan to parade here tomorrow, the biggest day in their calendar, and now there's confusion over whether an agreement between the residents and the Brethren really is that. The Catholics here say they'll be protesting tomorrow. To the Orangemen, though, this stretch of road is as crucial as that in Portadown. One problem resolved, another one looming. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
The Kremlin says that Boris Yeltsin's condition is improving following his admission to hospital with chest pains. The Russian president, who's 64, has had a heart problem for several years, and recently his health has visibly deteriorated.
This is the hospital where President Yeltsin is being treated tonight, the heavily guarded Moscow Central Clinic. He was rushed here after suffering chest pains caused by a problem of the blood supply to his heart. The 64-year-old president has undergone a series of tests, but he's not said to be in any danger, and his spokesman says he should be leaving soon.
The president will go ahead with an official visit to Oslo. The doctors have said there is no reason for serious concern about his health, and we have no grounds to disbelieve them.
Russian television has been carrying the latest medical bulletins on President Yeltsin, insisting there's no need for surgery and that he is recovering well. Around the hospital today, some Russians didn't seem to care very much anyway, but others were worried.
I think it's tragic. With the country in the state it is, it's very important that the president should be healthy.
I don't think it's that important. Everything that is bad in Russia has already happened.
I think it's very bad that he's ill. I want him to continue as president.
Mr. Yeltsin seemed well enough when he was last seen in public at this football match on Sunday. And earlier this year, he allowed the cameras to film him relaxing on holiday, an attempt to dismiss the speculation that he has serious health problems and may not be fit enough to run for re-election next year. But in his autobiography, Mr. Yeltsin has admitted he's been dogged by heart trouble ever since he played sport as a young man. And in April, it was confirmed he has a problem with high blood pressure. Many Russians believe their president's ill health is closely linked to his alleged love of alcohol, with accusations that drunkenness has led Mr. Yeltsin to make a fool of himself in public, here in Berlin and also in Ireland, when he could not be roused to get off his plane and greet the official welcoming party. At a summit of former Soviet states, Mr. Yeltsin was seen to stagger slightly. As usual, no one was sure whether it was due to tiredness, drunkenness or illness. There was already considerable doubt about whether Mr. Yeltsin would stand for the presidency again next June. Recently, his opinion poll ratings here have slipped disastrously to well below 10%. Now, with this new evidence of his health problems, both he and his family may decide that it's best for him to opt for the quiet life next summer and simply retire. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
The scare over Mr. Yeltsin's health has increased speculation both in Moscow and in the West over his political future and his likely successor. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Tom Carver now looks at President Yeltsin's prospects and how they're viewed in the West.
Ever since he clambered onto a tank to defend Russia's emerging democracy, the West has backed Boris Yeltsin. Everyone hoped he'd lead Russia into a modern democratic society, but the economic problems of change have come close to overwhelming him. Prices and crime have rocketed, breeding discontent. Yeltsin's treatment of his opponents has often disappointed. Shelling his own parliament was hardly the action of a modern statesman. But despite his erratic behaviour, Western leaders have continued to back him for the lack of anyone better. Behind the scenes, though, they are already starting to cultivate possible successors. American Vice President Al Gore recently met Viktor Chernomyrdin, Russia's prime minister, who would take over if Yeltsin were forced to step down.
Viktor Chernomyrdin has quite a good reputation in the West. He is regarded as a safe pair of hands, somebody who's never likely to be an extremist. By background, he's more of a technocrat than a politician, but he's been learning some of the arts of a politician in recent years.
Chernomyrdin is hardly charismatic, but he recently won some popularity when he was seen negotiating live on television with Chechen rebels over the release of Russian hostages. But Yeltsin's illness has thrust other more unpredictable pretenders into the spotlight. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the extreme nationalist, recently demonstrated on television how he treats his opponents. Today he's been stirring up talk of a coup, projecting himself, though it's hard to imagine, as a possible presidential candidate. The war in Chechnya was a stark reminder of Russia's military power. Yeltsin's absence could make it easier to reach a swift conclusion, but the nationalists will be looking to exploit the political vacuum. Western leaders know that Russia's democracy began with Boris Yeltsin. There's no guarantee that it would survive without him, so for the moment they're wishing him a speedy recovery. Tom Carver, BBC News.
Here, accident investigators are trying to establish the cause of 2 early morning rail crashes. In Liverpool, 13 people were injured when a train went into barriers at Lime Street Station. In Strathclyde, a train smashed through buffers, ploughed through the ticket office and 2 shops at Largs. The station may now have to be demolished. 5 people, including the driver, suffered minor injuries. Police in Leeds say a crackdown on burglary and drug offences may have been responsible for the rioting in the Hyde Park area of the city last night. A pub was set alight and gangs of youths burnt cars and pelted emergency crews with missiles. Members of the Transport and General Workers Union meeting in Blackpool have backed a minimum wage of £4.15 an hour. The Labour leader, Tony Blair, has refused to set an exact figure before the next general election. The Burmese opposition leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has made her first public appearance after nearly 6 years under house arrest. Speaking to journalists and well-wishers at her home in Rangoon, she called for a spirit of reconciliation with the country's military regime.
It had been a wait of 6 long years for the Burmese dissident leader and her supporters. She emerged calm and resolute, her spirit unbroken after her detention. Her first words as a free woman were an appeal to her country's military rulers to join her for talks on national reconciliation. The world's media had gathered for her release, although the authorities are attempting to control the flow of information. Before leaving the home that had become her prison, Mrs. Suu Kyi told reporters that for progress there must be negotiation.
Dialogue has been undoubtedly the key to a happy resolution of long-festering problems. Once bitter enemies in South Africa are now working together for the betterment of their people. Why can't we look forward to a similar process? We have to choose between dialogue or utter devastation.
Despite the conditions under which she has been held, Mrs. Suu Kyi said she was without bitterness.
I, on my part, bear no resentment towards anybody for anything that happened to me during the last 6 years. This statement can only end in one way, with an expression of sincere thanks to people all over the world, especially to my countrymen, for all they have done to strengthen my resolve and to effect my release.
Mrs. Suu Kyi appealed to her supporters to bear no grudges and work slowly for progress. The outside world is hoping her release may be the start of a move to democracy, but even the most optimistic commentators believe it will be a long march. Others fear the release may be a public relations exercise by Rangoon, anxious for acceptance by the international community. Orla Guerin, BBC News.
The French President Jacques Chirac has been given a hostile reception by members of the European Parliament, opposed to French plans to resume nuclear testing in the South Pacific. He was loudly booed as he entered the Parliament building in Strasbourg, and the protest continued when he began to speak. One MEP said France had no right to inflict environmental terror thousands of miles from its shores. The United States is to restore full diplomatic relations with Vietnam, more than 20 years after the end of the war between the two countries. The announcement was made by President Clinton this evening. The move has been welcomed by US business leaders, but some veterans groups remain bitterly opposed.
After weeks of hesitation, Bill Clinton finally took the plunge today and walked into the East Room to mark a decisive change in American foreign policy.
Today I am announcing the normalization of diplomatic relationships with Vietnam.
It's a controversial move for a president who once protested against the Vietnam War, but he was flanked by powerful allies, among them a senior Republican senator, a former fighter pilot who was once tortured in a Vietnamese prison.
I think that the president did the right thing. I think that most Americans will appreciate that he decided to stand up for what was right for America.
Recovering the remains of those lost in Vietnam has been the key, and the Clinton White House says Hanoi has cooperated fully. But opponents say with over 1,600 soldiers still missing, it's outrageous for a president who chose not to fight to do a deal with Vietnam's communist government.
It's unbelievable that of all the human beings that should be in the White House, in the Oval Office, in the Rose Garden, it's a man who let 3 high school men go in his place.
Republican leaders have warned President Clinton a new bill in Congress could block funds for the US embassy in Hanoi. And at the Vietnam Memorial, relatives and veterans still gather. They don't agree it's time to forget the past. Today, their POW flags fly upside down, a protest against plans for US business to take advantage of Vietnam's expanding markets.
They're being very hypocritical and saying, well, we can help make conditions better, which is bull, because what they're doing is reinforcing the regime that's in power.
I am completely and totally in opposition to what he's doing.
Complaints President Clinton has sold out to Vietnam won't go away. The largest veterans organization here is highly critical, but his advisors say better around now, well ahead of next year's elections. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington.
The amount of goods leaving Britain's factories fell unexpectedly in May for the second month in a row. In the latest 3-month period, output was 0.3% higher than in the previous 3 months, but that still suggests a trend of very slow growth. The car industry, which has seen falling sales recently, today urged the government to pay motorists to scrap old cars.
As the cars stack up on the forecourts, it's a nervous time for the dealers preparing for the traditional August rush. It now looks as though sales of the new N registration cars this summer will be no higher than the figure for last August. The manufacturers say the government should help them sell more cars. They want a £500 handout for anyone who trades in a car over 10 years old for a new one.
In 1986, there were 4.5 million vehicles at 10 years of age and over. That figure has now increased to 7.5 million, and we foresee it expanding even further. Now, that's not in anyone's interest, certainly not in the environment's interest, where modern cars pollute considerably less than cars of 10 years of age and over. And it's for that reason that we think this scheme is very timely.
The industry thinks the scrapyard is the best home for these older vehicles. There are more around now than there were, because during the recession, people were more likely to keep their old cars on the road. And the latest surge in enthusiasm for new cars has now apparently stalled. Car sales for the first half of each year rose steadily after 1992 as the recovery took hold. But after another healthy rise in the first half of 1994, sales so far this year have turned out slightly lower. Companies are still buying more fleet cars, but private buyers are staying away.
The car makers say the government should be able to recoup the cost of their scheme in higher tax revenues from increased car sales. But their arguments are unlikely to find much favour. If the government were to help the car industry, they'd be faced with a queue of other companies looking for subsidies for their products too. Ed Crooks, BBC News.
Security at many maternity units in hospitals in England and Wales is still not tight enough, according to a survey by the National Association of Health Authorities and Trusts. The survey says that most units are unlocked and unguarded for most of the day, in spite of concerns following the abduction of a number of babies.
On guard at a hospital, security staff vet all visitors who check in and out of the maternity unit. It's in addition to surveillance cameras now widely in use and staff identity cards. More and more hospitals are spending tens of thousands of pounds a year to protect babies and reassure parents.
It's nice to actually know that the nurses are very aware, the nursing staff are very aware of it, and remind us to be aware of the fact that somebody can still come in and take your baby away.
I think it's very important. You have a lot of worries when you've got a newborn baby, obviously, and if that's one thing that can just be put completely to the back of your mind, then it must be a very good thing.
University College Hospital in London is about to begin electronic tagging of babies. Today's report by the National Association of Health Authorities and Trusts reveals that half the maternity units questioned are either already using tags or considering them. Baby snatches are rare, and tight security can be expensive. A dilemma for hospitals when resources are already stretched. But the government says security must be a priority.
If anything does go wrong, such as a very rare event that a baby is taken, that is going to absolutely devastate their hospital, and they've got to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Despite steps taken after the abduction of Abby Humphries a year ago, today's report suggests hospitals can't afford to be complacent over security. Christine Stewart, BBC News.
The Brent Spar oil platform has arrived in Norway, where the government has given permission for it to be anchored for a year. Last month, the Shell oil company had to abandon its plan to sink the redundant platform in the Atlantic after opposition from Greenpeace and the German and Danish governments. The platform is now anchored in Erfjord in southwest Norway.
Journey's end and a temporary home for the Brent Spar. This Norwegian fjord offers a safe anchorage for the 110-metre deep structure. Environmentalists claim the credit for forcing owners Shell not to dump it at sea.
Was a groundswell of public opinion that started in Europe and flowed all over the place, globally even. People just didn't want oil installations dumped in the sea.
The embarrassment of a public climb down has left Shell cautious about its plans.
The studies we are now going to carry out will be looking at all the disposal options, which include the onshore option, which include the vertical dismantle and the horizontal dismantlement, but very much work has to be done before we can make any definitive statements about it.
Here at least the Brent Spar is welcome. It'll cost about £50 million to dismantle it, and Norway's hard-pressed shipbuilding and oil rig construction industry, which is deep in recession, very much wants to win the contract. In this yard, the number of jobs has halved. Aging oil platforms could bring prosperity. So it might be the first of many, but the Brent Spar is no stranger here. 20 years ago, it was assembled in this field before beginning its working life. Richard Wilson, BBC News, Norway.
And the main news again, Bosnian Serb television is claiming that a second UN safe area at Žepa is about to fall into their hands. Earlier, the Serbs captured the town of Srebrenica, despite NATO airstrikes. Tens of thousands of refugees are tonight fleeing from the area. Newsnight is on BBC2 at 10:30, but from the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening. Now the main stories from the Look North newsroom. West Yorkshire police say a night of rioting in Leeds was sparked by a small band of troublemakers. But tonight some local residents claim the rising tension is due in part to what they say are the heavy-handed tactics used by the police.
The focal point of last night's riots is this evening being pulled down brick by brick. The trouble flared just before midnight when youths firebombed the Jolly Brewer pub, torched cars and stoned police. Police presence has been stepped up in the area over recent weeks and several raids have been carried out on houses in connection with drug-related crimes. Local residents claim the police have been heavy-handed.
Police brutality, the way they treat people, I'm not saying if they've committed a crime they shouldn't be arrested or whatever, but it's the way that they actually come and arrest them. There's no need for some of the brutality that they go through.
But the police believe last night's trouble was sparked by a small criminal element who were objecting to their recent campaign to crack down on crime in the area. They deny they were heavy-handed and have vowed to continue their clampdown on criminals. The police say relations with the community are not strained, but they will meet with residents to try and resolve the situation.
Speaking earlier on Look North, the police defended their tactics in the Hyde Park area. They said they had the support of the vast majority of local people and denied they'd lost touch with grassroots feeling.
The community at large in that area is supportive of the police. They're supportive of the police officers that there are on the beat. There are more police officers out on the beat in West Yorkshire than there ever has been in its history. So we have got lots of police officers out on the streets, and they were certainly supportive of the way we were dealing with criminals within that particular area.
The family from Humberside, who won more than £20 million on the National Lottery, returned to Hull today to find their home had been ransacked by burglars. Terry and Brenda Benson say the thieves have taken family treasures that money can never replace.
£20 million richer, Brenda and Terry Benson were back home in Hull today, the excitement and celebrations though marred by the overnight break-in. Thieves had entered the couple's home through a rear window, escaping with personal possessions including all of Mrs Benson's jewellery, items which the family say are irreplaceable.
One was her mother's bracelet, oh, he's no longer with us, and the others are pearls that I bought her for her Thatcher's wedding anniversary. And I'm willing to state this, I won't say how much, but if anybody will return them, I'll give them a reward.
After 2 days in the media spotlight, the Bensons are now hoping for a little peace and quiet. Tonight, meanwhile, there have been calls for all future lottery winners to be offered greater protection.
Finally, we'd like to apologise to some of our viewers who were unable to receive the BBC earlier in the evening after one of our transmitters was hit by lightning. The problem's now been sorted out. Well, that's it from Look North. We'll be back tomorrow in Business Breakfast from 6:25. Now the national weather forecast.
A very good evening to you. The thunderstorms continue to rumble the way northwards. We can see where they are just at the moment, most of them in southwestern parts of Scotland, down across northwestern parts of England. Some have formed in eastern England this evening. And as you can see, a great crop of them just off the East Anglian coast. The radar shows the heaviest of the rain up in this northwestern area. But if we get in a little bit closer, you can see that there are storms about, some showers up in Cambridgeshire, running up into Lincolnshire.
And I'm so fat. All right.